Homage to Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to Manjushri, homage to all the lineage masters. Profound and subtle dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we can follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate all sentient beings, please generate unsurpassed bodhicitta. Next, let's discuss the view. Yesterday we talked about the uncommon view. We also briefly covered the concepts of the uncommon and common views in Vajrayana. Today, let's look at the divisions of the view. There are three aspects of the view that are well known throughout the classes of the Nyingma Tantras. They are the view that sees conditioned phenomena, the view that sees the nature of phenomena, and the view that sees self-awareness. These three not only pertain to this context, they pervade all views. They cover all worldly views as well as supramundane views. Whether it is the view of Sutrayana or Vajrayana, all of them are included here. There isn't a single one left out. They encompass every possible view. Why is that? It's because when you want to determine the ultimate truth of all things, you need a view to define it. When we use the view to make this determination, it's because they are terms that enumerate the definitive subjects of the conventional, the genuine, and the inseparable two truths. The first is the view of conditioned phenomena. So what does this mean? You probably know the conditioned phenomena and the nature of phenomena. Conditioned phenomena refers to relative truth, while the nature of phenomena is ultimate truth. The true essence of all things is called the nature of phenomena, whereas conditioned phenomena refers to the aspect that appears to us. For example, this pillar you see right now, which appears before us, is a conditioned phenomenon, but in reality its essence is empty and free from all conceptual elaborations, and that is its nature. Therefore, any view that allows you to identify the appearances of all phenomena or relative truth is what we call the view of conditioned phenomena. In other words, it is the subject that defines the conventional. You should understand the terms object and subject. The object refers to what is perceived, while the subject refers to your consciousness, wisdom, or the view itself. The point is to define the conventional and relative nature of all things. For instance, according to the Madhyamaka school of Sutrayana, all phenomena are said to be like dreams, illusions, mirages, or the moon's reflection in water within the conventional realm. So what do we use to figure it out? We use the view. The specific view that realizes this is called the view of conditioned phenomena. Furthermore, according to Sutrayana, all phenomena are beyond the four extremes and eight conceptual elaborations in the ultimate sense. Then what do we use to realize that all phenomena are beyond the four extremes and eight conceptual elaborations? We use a particular view to make that determination. The view that realizes this is called the view of the nature of phenomena. Actually, this emptiness of ultimate truth and the dreamlike appearances of the conventional truth, it's actually just like the relationship between ice and water. They are one in essence. They just show up as different aspects. One is its dreamlike appearance, and the other is its empty nature. These two have always been non-dual and inseparable, without any meeting or parting. So, what do we use to decide this? We use the view of self-awareness. This is also the case within Sutrayana. We establish these different views as terms that enumerate the definitive subjects of the inseparable two truths. Nevertheless, at this time, these three will be explained according to the uncommon tradition. What I just described was the Sutrayana perspective. I believe this is introduced in the Sword of Wisdom. It is extremely important. In his other pith instructions, Mipham Rinpoche also repeatedly emphasized the distinct relationships between these three views. In fact, if you truly master these three views, you won't face any major difficulties in evaluating the nature of all things in the world. Now, when it comes to ascertaining the unsurpassed secret mantra, there are some uncommon explanations and ways of establishing these uncommon views. In this context, with respect to that, the view of conditioned phenomena includes seeing the world and inhabitants, the support and the supported, as the mandala of enlightened kayas and wisdom. Recall the Sutrayana view of conditioned phenomena. It's enough to see all things as dreamlike and illusory in the conventional sense. But the view of conditioned phenomena in Vajrayana is different. It involves the entire external world, the support, and the internal world of sentient beings, the supported. Every aspect of the environment and the beings within it is seen as the primordial pure mandala of the three kayas and five wisdoms. This is great purity. This means that these relative phenomena you see right before your eyes, whether they are sentient beings or the external mountains, rivers, and earth, their true essence is actually inseparable from the three kayas and five wisdoms. It is a completely pure mandala. Now, you might wonder, how can it be a pure mandala? We will discuss this further when we delve into the view. The subject or wisdom that is able to ascertain this truth is what we call the view of conditioned phenomena. This is a unique characteristic of Vajrayana. It's something you simply won't find in Sutrayana. This point is quite clear, whether you are debating with someone or just exploring the topic deeply. You could say that in Sutrayana, while there is certainly the wisdom that realizes all phenomena as empty, and although texts like the Uttara Tantra Shastra or the Dharmadhatu Stotra mention in a more hidden way that all sentient beings possess the Sugata Garbha, the understanding that this Sugata Garbha pervades everything, its luminous aspect, and how the essence of all things is empty, yet inseparable from this luminosity, the profound inseparability of the great emptiness of the Dharmadhatu and clear light, is not found in other Sutrayana traditions. That's why we emphasize the unique feature of the view of conditioned phenomena here, seeing everything as great purity. This is incredibly significant and profound. It's like when I was teaching the Manjushri Dzogchen earlier. On the surface, things might look similar, but in reality, there are certain subtle points that are often misunderstood. For example, in Secret Mantra, we talk about specific sitting postures or ways of looking. You can find these physical movements in many Qigong books as well. Maybe when you see me demonstrating these postures, you wonder how to do them, but the physical posture itself isn't the most critical part. Is a sitting posture necessary? Yes, it is. But what is the most vital point? It is realizing the secret of the mind. This secret of the mind, whether in yoga or the various extraordinary practices popular today, does not offer such a profound and direct way to search for the original essence of the Sugata Garbha. The theories and pith instructions we have here simply don't exist in other books. Perhaps you've read all sorts of books since you were young and think that every book is basically the same. They might look similar on the surface, but their value is completely different. General merchandise in a store is not the same as pure gold. Of course, someone who doesn't know any better might think, oh, a piece of iron and a piece of gold are probably worth the same, but that is just a fault of his own vision. In reality, it's not like that at all. You see, if someone doesn't understand its true value, they might think it's all the same. But in reality, the difference is vast. The view of conditioned phenomena here allows you to realize that everything is pure. However, in Sutrayana, the same view can never reach the conclusion of universal purity. At most, it follows what is taught in the entering the middle way, that as long as your six faculties are functioning normally, what you perceive is simply the reality of conventional truth. The view of the nature of phenomena sees all appearances to be inseparable with great evenness. In their very essence, all phenomena possess an equal and empty nature, just as the middle way explains. But you should know there's a major difference between this emptiness and the emptiness taught in Vajrayana. We will likely cover this later. In the Sutrayana path, you reach this understanding of emptiness through logic, analysis, and conceptual investigation. But in Vajrayana, you experience it directly through a supreme pith instruction. There is a real difference between direct experience and logical analysis. Why is it like this in Vajrayana? It's because Vajrayana provides you with these skillful means, whereas Sutrayana relies entirely on deducing conclusions through logic. It's much like how modern scientists use deduction to study the nature of matter. In Vajrayana, however, as mentioned in the beacon of certainty, you personally experience the great bliss within the sphere of the nature of phenomena. This is what we call great equality, and it's different from the Sutrayana view. On the surface, both are subjects that realize emptiness free from conceptual play, but one is gained through inference, while the other is gained through direct experience and true realization. The difference is clear. Now, the third is the view of self-awareness. The view of seeing self-awareness is the discerning wisdom of the surpassing truth of inseparable purity and evenness, the great Dharmakaya. For example, the functioning and impermanence of a pillar are actually one in essence, even though we view them as different aspects. In this context, the empty essence of all phenomena and their luminous nature are inseparable. You realize this inseparability through the view of self-awareness. It's like using a microscope to observe tiny bacteria, or using a specialized instrument to find exactly what you need. Every instrument is unique. The instrument of our self-awareness allows you to know the true nature of all things. You see that purity and emptiness are one, and this is the great Dharmakaya. We understand the great Dharmakaya to be free from all conceptual elaborations. But this state is not just emptiness alone, nor is it just luminosity alone. You reach this profound state through individual self-awareness. So keep in mind that these are the three great views within Vajrayana. Now let's talk about proving the nature of the view. If we only use scriptural authority, some people might not believe it. After all, scriptures are the words of the enlightened ones, and those with limited wisdom may not fully grasp their profound meaning. But what follows is based entirely on reasoning, and when it comes to logic, no one can really deny its truth. Therefore, whether we are establishing the view of purity, or the view of equality, or the non-dual view of both, we will use logical proof to establish them. This is a unique feature of the Guhyagarbha Tantra. We can look at this from two perspectives. First, demonstrating mantra's view is more sublime than sutras. Second, proving the profundity of the sublime view of mantra. Let's start with the first, how the mantra's view is more sublime than sutras. Generally speaking, some people who only study Sutrayana might feel uncomfortable hearing this. Perhaps they've never studied Vajrayana and don't accept it, thinking that Sutrayana and Vajrayana are essentially the same. Some might even think Vajrayana is improper, while Sutrayana has already surpassed it in terms of purity and correctness. There are teachers and practitioners in Sutrayana who don't understand Vajrayana and hold these kinds of beliefs. Of course, it's understandable that you might have such thoughts when influenced by that environment or your peers. However, such ideas or claims haven't been truly examined. If you really look into it, it's not that Vajrayana just claims to be special on its own. When we study and observe this together, we'll see for ourselves whether Sutrayana really has such profound truths. As we examine it, we'll see that Vajrayana indeed has many unique qualities that cannot be found in Sutrayana. If someone asks, is there a difference between the views of Sutrayana and Vajrayana? First, some may wonder if there is a difference between the view of mantra and sutra. Concerning the mere establishment of the basic space of phenomena free from elaboration as the object under consideration, there is no difference. Concerning the mere establishment of the basic space of phenomena free from elaboration as the object under consideration, there is no difference. Sakya Pandita once said that the Vajrayana view cannot go beyond that of Sutrayana, because the Prajnaparamita in Sutrayana is already free from the four extremes and 8 elaborations. He argued that if the view of Vajrayana went beyond Sutrayana, then it would end up having conceptual elaborations. This was a logical challenge raised in the past. But in reality, that statement only applies from the perspective of the empty nature of the Dharmadhatu. From the standpoint of emptiness, the view of Vajrayana is indeed no different or superior to it. It's about establishing the basic space of phenomena free from elaboration. All phenomena are already realized as empty in the Prajna Sutras. When we studied the verse summary of Prajnaparamita last year, you all learned how to resolve everything as emptiness, the great emptiness, or the great freedom from elaboration. From that perspective, there is no difference at all. However, since the view is proved from the perspective of the subject, these points are extremely critical. I wonder if you can all keep this in mind. If you can, it will be very helpful whether you are practicing on your own or discussing with others. In fact, you should maintain some unique insights in your daily life. The difference lies in the subject that perceives the Dharmadhatu. You see, a view is established from the side of the subject. Actually, what we call a view is not established by the object itself. If we only look at the object, then there is no difference between the views of Sutrayana and Vajrayana. However, a view is primarily defined by the subject, not the object. It is established by wisdom. And from the perspective of wisdom, the subject that perceives the Dharmadhatu is different. Because a view is established from the aspect of the subject, there is a significant difference in the manner. So is there a difference between the Sutrayana and Vajrayana views? Of course, in front of some Sutrayana masters or scholars, we might not want to mention this. If we do, they might create negative karma. They might lack the ability to debate or truly analyze. And if they hold a stubborn opinion, it's better not to say anything at all. If someone says that the views of Vajrayana and Sutrayana are the same, we can agree and say they are the same. Why? Because from the aspect of the empty nature of the Dharmadhatu, we also admit they are the same. But from the side of the actual view itself, Vajrayana has many unique features. This point, even for those of you sitting here today, might be a piece of fresh knowledge you didn't know before. If the object to be resolved by the view, the nature as it is of the space of phenomena, were not the sole nature, Mifam Rinpoche explains here. Just now we said that from the aspect of the empty nature of the Dharma Dhatu, the views of Sutrayana and Vajrayana should be consistent. If they weren't, it would lead to several logical faults. If the object resolved by the view, the empty Dharma Dhatu, were not a single truth, for example, if the emptiness resolved in the root stanzas of the middle way and the one in the Guhya Garbha Tantra were not the same nature, it would absurdly follow that the nature of phenomena could diverge into many aspects. The nature of phenomena, as described in the Ornament of Higher Realization and many other texts, is a single unity. No one says there are two Dharmadhatus, but if the Dharmadhatu in Sutrayana and the one in Vajrayana were two different types of emptiness, then they would become separate entities, and that is a logical fault. There is another logical fault. It would then follow that Sutra's path of seeing could not see the nature as it is. In Vajrayana, the path of seeing reaches the Dharmadhatu itself, whereas in Sutrayana, it has yet to truly realize suchness. That would be a serious fault, and that's the second one. Then there is a third fault. Then it would be necessary to prove how an elaboration in excess of the elaborations of the four extremes is eliminated. Normally, being free from the four extremes and eight elaborations is the ultimate goal. But if the object of the Vajrayana view were somehow different from the one in Sutrayana, it would mean there's some other elaboration out there, apart from the four extremes, that we still have to cut through. As the beacon of certainty explains, from the side of emptiness, the Sutrayana and Vajrayana views are basically the same. Therefore, all learned and accomplished ones unanimously agree upon this single crucial point, that the nature of phenomena is directly realized through both sutras and mantras paths of seeing. The path of seeing in Sutrayana is like this, and the path of seeing in Vajrayana is the same, because at the path of seeing you see the Dharmadhatu exactly as it is. So from the side of the Dharmadhatu, the views are indeed the same. There's no question about that. If one thinks, well then, even though the object of the view is the same, the view is not proved to be more sublime. They might say, didn't you just say that the object of the view is the same? In that case, when you say the Vajrayana view goes beyond Sutrayana, that just wouldn't make sense. After all, if the object is the same, like two people looking at the same vase, then the way they see it must be the same as well. This is the challenge they might present to us. Without looking closer, it might seem to make sense. For instance, if two people look at the same vase, you'd think their perception is the same because the object is the same. But in reality, that's just not true. Think about it. If one person has perfect vision and the other doesn't, even though they are looking at the exact same object, the result will be a blur for one and clear for the other. We will use this logic to explain the point. This logic is absolutely solid. So it's logically proven that the Vajrayana view does go beyond Sutrayana. It is as stated in the Lamp of the Three Modes of Reasoning. A single meaning, no delusion, a wealth of methods, freedom from hardship, and for those of keen faculties, by these the vehicle of mantra is exalted. This is actually very easy to prove. How so? Even though the object of the view, the emptiness of the Dharmadhatu, is the same, Vajrayana's view is not obscured, its methods are many, and the practice is not difficult. And since the practitioners are those with sharpest faculties, the mantra vehicle surpasses Sutrayana. Thus, as taught, based on the differences that there is no delusion due to prajna. It has two unique features. First, its view and wisdom are beyond those of Sutrayana. That's one point. Second, it excels because of the many skillful means that allow you to swiftly see the true nature. In terms of practice, it has special methods that simply don't exist in Sutrayana. In fact, many past masters have given countless teachings on how Vajrayana surpasses Sutrayana. There are so many unique features, but Mifam Rinpoche summarizes them into two. One is the superior wisdom of the view, and the other is the superior methods of practice. These 2 points cover all the ways in which it is superior. Generally speaking, the Vajrayana view truly does go beyond Sutrayana. Some of you here might not agree. If you don't, we can discuss it privately, or you can speak with me directly. But the logic is solid. In dependence upon that, the path is practical and swift, so it is therefore without hardship. As I mentioned, the unobscured view and the ease of practice through many means make it not hard. Additionally, as for the person who is the support, mantra is sublime in that it is the province of those whose faculties are sharper than those to be tamed by the causal vehicle. Of course, the superior wisdom and methods are the main things. The other points, like having sharper faculties or fewer hardships, are more like side benefits. They aren't the core features, but they still count as advantages. Let me give you an analogy. It's like someone with good vision and someone with cloudy vision. When they both look at a distant object, there's a difference in the quality of what they see. A person with good vision can see someone far away with total clarity, but someone with poor vision will only see a blur when looking at the same distant object. The object they are looking at is the same, but the subject's ability to see is different. Other texts use different analogies as well. But we'll focus on this one for now. My point is this. You could say Sutrayana is like having slightly poor vision, while in Vajrayana what you see is quite clear. Some might not accept this, but even if they don't, we can prove it further. Thus, mantra surpasses sutra both by way of lucid appearances in evenness and in the way certainty arises after evenness. When you are in meditation, your clear appearance is like someone with perfect vision seeing distant objects with total clarity, because in your meditation both the luminosity and the emptiness are incredibly clear and vivid. Naturally, the certainty that arises in your post-meditation will be different too. I often think about this. Whether people study Sutrayana or Vajrayana, there's really no difference. They are all those to be guided by the Buddha. But why is it that their faith and inner experiences can be so different? To a large extent, practitioners of Vajrayana tend to be more fervent. You can see this clearly among many lay people and monastics today. I'm not just trying to praise our own tradition, but sometimes you just have to look at the facts. For example, Sutrayana monasteries also have Buddhist academies, but for some who study there, what they learn often stays at the level of theory and logical deduction. It's as if the result they reach isn't very humanized and their direct experience isn't very strong. On the other hand, some who study Vajrayana for just a few short years completely master these very powerful and direct pith instructions. By saying this, I'm not trying to praise myself or put others down. We can look very fairly and objectively at the experiences of scholars in both Sutrayana and Vajrayana academies. Setting aside the sectarian positions of Sutrayana and Vajrayana, just look at the experience itself. You'll see there really are differences in certain areas. Why is that? It's because the vivid appearance they experience in meditation is different, and the certainty they gain in post-meditation is also different. Because Sutrayana focuses mostly on logical deduction, the emptiness and state of mind reached in meditation aren't quite clear. Of course, once you reach the first bhumi, it doesn't matter much. But before the first bhumi, one still has these kinds of conceptual thoughts and investigations mixed in. Vajrayana, however, is very direct, because what you realize in meditation is different. The result you bring into the post-meditation state will be different as well. The final outcome and the certainty you gain are simply not the same. As for the first, on the path of sutra through analytical meditation that depends upon inference, along with gathering vast accumulations of merit and wisdom, after a long while the space of phenomena can be directly realized. This is Sutrayana. Indeed, when you study the root stanzas of the Middle Way or the Prajna Sutras, most often you start with investigative awareness and inference. Even when resolving emptiness in the end, you're still clinging to emptiness as a conceptual object. Tsongkhapa also mentioned this in his great treatise on the stages of the path, specifically in the section on special insight. He describes the state of finally resolving that things lack any real existence. In reality, this is the view. In Sutrayana, you break down everything that seems real until nothing real is left. Of course, you don't even cling to this non-reality. It's not existence, not non-existence, and it's free from the four extremes. But even after moving away from the four extremes, your mind still holds on to something. You often feel this after studying Middle Way. I've spent many years myself immersed in the study of the Middle Way. Based on my own experience, for example, when I study the root stanzas of the Middle Way, the clear words, Ma, or the 400 stanzas, and all those related Middle Way texts, when you finally resolve everything as emptiness, in the end, even that emptiness itself doesn't exist. But even if emptiness doesn't exist, it feels as if there's still a non-existent thing there. Generally speaking, there is still a subtle clinging to this emptiness or selflessness within one's mind. The beacon of certainty and other pith instructions make this same point. Generally, Sutrayana relies on investigative mind to analyze and reach a conclusion after gathering vast amounts of merit. Even for those with the sharpest faculties, it takes an Asankhya eon to finally reach the wisdom of the path of preparation and gain true realization. By contrast here, with mantra, this can be realized within one's mind by means of direct experience devoid of analysis. Furthermore, by the strength of having matured through empowerment and the possession of the special key points of Upadeshas, the achievement of lucid appearances with respect to the fundamental nature. For those who have a little experience in practice and have spent years studying the sutras, shastras, and tantras, not many words are needed. No matter how much you say, words can't always express it clearly. But when you look at your own mind through the lens of the tantras and pith instructions, you can see the difference between what you gain from Sutrayana versus Vajrayana. Of course, we admit that Sutrayana is profound, especially the teachings from the Buddha's second and third turnings of the Wheel of Dharma. The meanings are very deep, but for an ordinary person following a step-by-step approach, it's hard to grasp everything at the start. Actually, the Buddha's original intent when he began teaching was the luminosity free from elaborations and unconditioned Dharma. It wasn't just mere emptiness or solid existence. From the very first turning of the wheel, the core principles were already set. But if he had said it directly, people wouldn't have been able to accept it. So first he taught the Four Noble Truths, then the aspect of emptiness, and finally the aspect of luminosity. But when it comes to the actual practice of these pith instructions, Sutrayana has almost none. Why is it that in Sutrayana practice, besides chanting sutras, there is almost a blank when it comes to meditative visualization? How do we meditate on the emptiness of the first turning? How to contemplate the meaning of the second turning? Even when contemplating the truth of suffering or the pains of samsara, certain Sutrayana traditions simply lack the actual how-to for the practice. Without a method of practice, you're just saying the words. It's very hard to actually visualize them in your heart. For beings in this age of Dharma decline, it's not easy to have the full meaning of the sutras appear clearly in the mind. But in Vajrayana, it is quite easy. You look directly at the nature of your mind, free from analytical thought. You don't need all that complex logic like neither one nor many or diamond splinters. All those common and uncommon proofs used in middle way philosophy, you just don't need them. Just let go of the analyzing mind and experience it directly. Observe your mind right now. Its essence is empty. Its nature is luminous. This is beyond words. Through a pith instruction, you can reach this very quickly. This way of realization is much more accessible. Even as a child, some people can have these experiences. I remember reading in the biography of Jamgon Kongtrul Rinpoche, when he was very young, he had a teacher, an old lama. Once, the two of them were traveling and got completely exhausted. The old lama sat down under a massive boulder. Kongtrul Rinpoche was also worn out. He was just a little boy then. The old lama said, "Sometimes when people are very tired or in pain, that is a great time to meditate. The realization will come naturally. Shall we practice here for a bit?" Then the old practitioner sat there under the rock and rested in the nature of mind. Kongtrul Rinpoche was very young, but he followed his teacher's lead and sat there too. As he sat, he felt he truly understood the meaning of the mind's luminosity and emptiness. Later he became, as you all know, one of Mipham Rinpoche's own teachers. He was truly extraordinary. In his later years, when he reflected back, he realized the state he experienced as a child hadn't changed at all. I think these people are the true great masters. Ordinary people can hardly compare to them. But honestly, When you have the Guru's pith instructions and the teachings of the Tantras, combined with your own virtuous roots, just a few words or a short moment is enough to understand it completely. Mipham Rinpoche said in one of his pith instructions, spending an entire eon trying to reach the view through logical analysis is not as powerful as looking at your own mind for a single moment while resting on your bed. He really said that. If you just rest there and look at your mind, you'll see your mind's true nature, which in fact is the ultimate nature of all things. In that moment, you aren't using some complex theory or reasoning, it's pure self-recognition. And anyone can do this, as Guru Rinpoche put it. If you realize this, even a cowherd can get liberation. But without this realization, even a great Pandita remains lost in confusion. He was talking about the same thing, recognizing the nature of the mind. The text also explains that regarding this recognition of the mind's nature, if you move beyond the analytical mind and experience it directly, for those with sharp faculties, this can happen during an empowerment, using a crystal as a symbolic pointer, or perhaps through just a few brief words of guidance from the Guru. In that very moment, some truly do awaken on the spot. It also goes back to what we discussed yesterday, taking the hidden principles in the Tantras and unlocking them with pith instructions. It's like a key. The key itself might be tiny, but once you have it, you can instantly open the door to a vast treasure. In the same way, some of these instructions on the nature of mind might seem very ordinary or simple on the surface. Yet for generations, the Vidyadharas have used these very brief words to help many people suddenly awaken and recognize their mind's true nature. This power of pith instructions makes the ultimate reality vividly clear. It's similar to clearly perceiving a distant form after applying a sight-enhancing eye potion. In ancient times, there were these unique eye potion. Normally, the human eye can't see objects at a great distance, but with the right formula, because of its potent properties, distant things, or even things buried underground, suddenly become visible. Vajrayana works exactly like that. Realities that would normally take ages to master in Sutrayana become clear through a single simple instruction. In fact, I shouldn't say this is limited to the Vajrayana context alone. Take Zen Buddhism, for example. Zen is actually quite similar to the Tang Dynasty esoteric Buddhism, or the Mahamudra of the Tantras. In Mahamudra, there are also specific teachings on how to rest the mind through a Sutrayana approach. Mahamudra is often divided into two types. The view of some Zen masters is likely very close to that of Vajrayana. Even though Zen doesn't require a formal empowerment first, it still uses the method of direct pointing to the mind. This direct approach also leads to the realization of the nature of mind. Another analogy is releasing the secret knots through skill with the key points of meditation upon the wheels of technique and so forth. For instance, a magician can make all kinds of things appear, elephants, horses, and so on. If a magician wants to make those illusions vanish instantly, he just has to release the secret knot, the key mechanism of the magic, and the entire illusion collapses. It's like being an expert mechanic. If you want to disable a car, you just find that one critical wire and disconnect it. The car might look perfectly fine on the outside, but it's not going anywhere. Normally, it's impossible to just shut off the chaotic illusions of the world, but a skilled guru knows that the root of all these illusions is the mind. By making a subtle adjustment at the level of the mind, that secret knot of delusion is snapped once and for all. That is the power of a pith instruction. Moreover, even the key analytical points of meditation on the paths of sutra ultimately arrive at the inseparability of the two truths. Whether it's the theories, the practices, or the instructions in Sutrayana, it all boils down to the fact that appearance and emptiness are one and the same, or as we say, the unity of purity and evenness. Now, some people take this too far. They say, oh, we don't need Sutrayana, it's not as good. Only Vajrayana is superior. But that's not necessary. The principles you learn through study and contemplation in Sutrayana are exactly what you apply when you reach Vajrayana. The middle way logic used to establish the emptiness of all things is still the same foundation when you get to the Tantras. The luminosity of the Buddha nature described in the Uttara Tantra Shastra and other third turning teachings is also the same luminosity you work with in Vajrayana. The difference is simply that the methods of practice have evolved and become more direct. Anyone who has spent a long time studying these texts will understand this very clearly. All those deep teachings on emptiness and luminosity in Sutrayana are all turned into direct pith instructions in Vajrayana. This makes the truth much more vivid, direct, and far easier for sentient beings to actually connect with and accept. Why are so many people drawn to Vajrayana? Of course, some might just be following a trend, which does happen. But for most, once they begin practicing Vajrayana, the effect is very direct. They can deal with their afflictions immediately. They can feel a real tangible transformation deep within their own heart. This is precisely the reason. It means that all the practices and theories in Sutrayana ultimately lead to the realization that the two truths are inseparable. Nevertheless, since it is difficult for beginners to ascertain and experience the union of the two truths as of equal taste, for instance, if you are simply told that all things are free from the four extremes and eight elaborations, or that emptiness is not separate from appearance, and appearance is not separate from emptiness, truly experiencing that single flavor or equality and gaining a definitive conviction that you can actually feel is very hard when someone is just starting out. They will emphatically hold to an emptiness in which the extremes are individually negated. As I mentioned in Sutrayana, Maifam Rinpoche once pointed this out. In order to sever the clinging to emptiness, in mantra, the Vajrayana reveals the wisdom of great bliss. In Sutrayana, a certain subtle attachment to emptiness often remains. You know, I have met some masters from Buddhist academies within the Sutrayana tradition who do not quite grasp the full depth of the teachings on emptiness. When I talk to people who have some understanding of emptiness and I ask them, what is the ultimate nature of all things? They often just say, oh, it's emptiness. I've studied the Diamond Sutra, so it's emptiness. I've studied the Shurangama Sutra, so it's emptiness. They believe that the absolute highest view of Sutrayana is just emptiness. That is still the case today. Even many scholars abroad think this way. When I interact with university professors who teach the Diamond Sutra, even those who are doctoral advisors, they still hold that the ultimate view of Sutrayana is simply emptiness. And for many, this emptiness is just a mere emptiness. The majority of people remain at that level of understanding. Conversely, in mantra, wisdom that is the clear light of union is revealed in its natural state. As I mentioned recently, if someone really refuses to admit that Vajrayana is extraordinary, well, I think we should look at it from the perspective of luminosity. On that point, they probably would not even be able to debate us, because Sutrayana truly lacks specific treatises that focus on luminosity, but Vajrayana has a vast array of pith instructions precisely on this topic. The ultimate nature of all things is not just emptiness, it is truly the inseparability of appearance and emptiness. If you don't accept this, then where do the infinite qualities of luminosity and wisdom found at the stage of no more learning come from? They would simply pop into existence out of nowhere for no reason at all. For anyone who truly understands cause and effect, that simply doesn't make sense. Nor does it align with the ultimate teachings of the Mahayana, so we don't need to argue with everyone about how great Vajrayana is. But when facts are facts and we really have to explain it, just saying Vajrayana is great or the Tantras are wonderful might not convince them. But you ask, is the essence of all things the union of appearance and emptiness? If they say no, that it's just a mere emptiness, well then they simply haven't fully realized the Buddha's intent, that's all. But if they do agree, then the next question is, which Sutrayana scripture explains this luminosity? It's not that Sutrayana scriptures are incomplete. The teachings are very complete. It's just that in certain areas, as I said before, the teachings are hidden or more indirect. This is because sentient beings have different capacities. If you taught Tathagata Garbha directly at that time, many would have thought, wait, if we are already perfect as we are, then that's no different from the eternal independent self of the non-Buddhists. Many people began to slander these ideas, so to clear up such misconceptions, the Buddha gave extensive teachings in the Lankavatara Sutra. As the text explains further, in the Kala Chakra it states, the three states of existence are not established as the forms of extremely subtle particles and cognition in the way that the proponents of external objects believe. The substantialists believe two things are truly existent, indivisible atoms and indivisible moments of consciousness. Here, the mind-only proponents believe that mere consciousness devoid of duality is established. When that is further analyzed, like those subtle particles, consciousness itself is also not established. The non-abiding prajna of the Buddhas is the middle path. The mind-only school believes in a consciousness that is free from subject and object. But then we come to the Madhyamaka, or the middle way, in Sutrayana. Since the Buddha's wisdom abides in nothing, it resolves everything into emptiness. First you determine that external objects don't exist. Then you see that consciousness itself is also non-existent. Finally, Madhyamaka concludes that everything is empty. This is the definitive Madhyamaka view. This was spoken by all Buddhas. Whoever is without unchanging bliss, which is to say, whoever does not possess it, considers emptiness by holding mere emptiness in mind, and as a result is unable to part with all reference points. Unchanging bliss refers to the great wisdom of Vajrayana. Specifically, it is that wisdom of pure and equal inseparability. For those who lack this wisdom, meditation in Sutrayana often ends up being a focus on mere emptiness. Therefore, the principle among Tantras, the Kalachakra, reveals a connate bliss, devoid of transition, that abides in the body, but does not arise from a solitary body, as taught in the vehicle of mantra. This wisdom of inseparability, the unity of appearance and bliss, is unchanging. It is the bliss of the co-emergent body. Physical bliss and mental bliss are different terms used here. In appearance, this wisdom of great bliss dwells within every human body. Yet its arising is quite miraculous. It does not actually originate from the body itself. If it were produced by the body, and we know the body eventually fails, then this wisdom, this Tathagata Garbha of pure and equal inseparability, would also be subject to birth, death, and impermanence. But that's not the case. This wisdom of pure and equal inseparability is only fully revealed in Vajrayana. The Kalachakra Tantra states this very clearly. Thus, as explained, lucid appearances are achieved in evenness through the direct experience of the meaning of the union of bliss and emptiness and the union of space and awareness, making mantra more sublime. This is why we say the view of Vajrayana surpasses that of Sutrayana. Some of you might not accept this at first, but I hope through study and contemplation you will see the Vajrayana view truly does go beyond Sutrayana in certain aspects. Now, we do acknowledge that from the perspective of the emptiness of the object, the views of Sutra and Tantra are the same. However, in terms of pith instructions for immediate experience, direct pointing, empowerments, and skillful means, through the generation and completion stages, Vajrayana is far superior. Sutrayana relies entirely on deduction and words to represent the truth. But Vajrayana, like the Great Perfection, points directly to the nature so you experience it yourself. Some methods use the generation and completion stages to bring the impure winds of mind into the central channel, instantly manifesting the natural luminosity of all things and the view of emptiness free from elaboration. This is something we must acknowledge. So for many of you who have come here to study Vajrayana, you will eventually see from the perspective of the view, so Vajrayana really does have many, many unique qualities. The superiority of Vajrayana isn't just something people say for effect. If it were just words, you might praise it today and support it with enthusiasm. But after a while, if someone tells you Vajrayana isn't that great, you might follow them and start slandering it yourself. It's possible. But if you plant a truly firm foundation of this view in your heart, it will never change.
Bandara Bandara